Good evening, and welcome to Truth Report. I'm Alex Truth, and tonight we are covering stories that the mainstream press is either burying or barely scratching the surface on. We've got floods in Kenya that are killing dozens while the world looks away, missile interceptions over the UAE, Chinese weapons scientists disappearing from public records, Israel denying it's running low on interceptors, and Iran rounding up alleged spies. These stories are connected in ways that most outlets won't tell you. Let's get into it.
I'm Maya Clarity, and let's start in Nairobi, Kenya, where at least 62 people are confirmed dead, including 8 children, after catastrophic flooding hit the capital and surrounding regions late last week. More than 2,000 families have been displaced, and aid workers are literally pulling bodies from floodwaters across the city. This is according to Kenyan police, reported by the South China Morning Post. 33 of those deaths occurred in Nairobi alone. And the rain is still falling. This is an ongoing disaster, not a past event.
And here's what the headlines won't tell you. Nairobi's flooding crisis is not a natural disaster in the way most people understand that term. This is a man-made catastrophe decades in the making. Nairobi's urban planning has been gutted by corruption. Wetlands that once absorbed floodwater have been built over by politically connected developers. Drainage systems are either non-existent or clogged with waste because municipal services have been chronically underfunded. The people dying in these floods are overwhelmingly poor, living in informal settlements in flood plains because they've been priced out of safer ground.
Exactly right. And let's talk about who is displaced. 2,000 families, Alex. These are not wealthy Kenyans in gated communities on high ground. These are residents of Mathar, Kibra, and Mukuru, some of the most densely populated informal settlements in East Africa. They were already living in precarious conditions before the rain started. The international community will send thoughts and prayers, maybe a few million in emergency aid, but nobody is asking why Nairobi's infrastructure fails its poorest residents every single rainy season. This is a pattern, not an anomaly.
And the climate dimension cannot be ignored. East Africa has been experiencing increasingly erratic rainfall patterns consistent with climate models that wealthy nations have known about for decades. Kenya contributes a negligible fraction of global carbon emissions, yet its citizens are paying the price with their lives. 62 dead. 8 of them children. The countries most responsible for the emissions driving these weather extremes are the same ones that have repeatedly failed to meet their climate finance commitments to vulnerable nations. That's not opinion, that's documented record.
The South China Morning Post, notably a Hong Kong-based outlet, is one of the few international sources giving this proper coverage. Ask yourself why major Western wire services aren't leading with 62 dead in a capital city. If 62 people died in flooding in a European capital, it would dominate every news cycle for a week. But Nairobi? It gets a paragraph buried below the fold. This disparity in coverage is itself a form of structural violence. It tells you whose lives the global media considers worthy of attention and whose it does not.
Let's move now to the Persian Gulf, where the UAE Ministry of Defense confirmed it intercepted 4 ballistic missiles and 6 drones. Middle East Eye reported this from their live blog coverage. Let that sink in. A country that markets itself as a luxury tourism and business hub, home to Dubai and Abu Dhabi, is shooting down ballistic missiles. This is not normal. And yet the coverage treats it almost as routine, as if missile defense activations over a major global financial center are just another Tuesday in the Middle East.
The critical question is who launched those missiles and drones, and the reporting so far has been remarkably vague on attribution. The UAE has been involved in the Yemen conflict through its support for various factions, and Houthi forces have previously targeted Emirati territory. But ballistic missiles represent a significant escalation in capability. These are not improvised weapons. Someone is supplying the technology, the components, and the targeting intelligence required to launch ballistic missiles at a Gulf state. That supply chain matters, and nobody in mainstream reporting is tracing it.
And let's talk about what successful interception actually means in strategic terms. The UAE intercepted these projectiles this time. But missile defense is a numbers game. Every interceptor costs millions of dollars. Every incoming missile or drone costs a fraction of that. The attacker has an inherent economic advantage. If you can force your adversary to spend $10 million defending against a $50,000 drone, you are winning the war of attrition even when every single one of your attacks gets stopped. That math is unsustainable, and defense planners across the Gulf know it.
Which brings us directly to our next story, because Israel is publicly rejecting reports that it faces interceptor shortages. Middle East Eye reports that Israeli officials are pushing back against claims that their missile defense stockpiles are running low. Now, when a government goes out of its way to deny something this specific, you should pay very close attention. Governments don't typically deny problems that don't exist. The fact that they feel compelled to address this publicly suggests the reports hit close enough to home to require a response.
Think about the strategic implications. Israel's Iron Dome, David Sling, and Arrow systems have been the backbone of its defense posture. They've been activated at unprecedented rates. Each Iron Dome interceptor reportedly costs somewhere between $40,000 and $50,000, while the Tamir missiles used are estimated at even higher per unit costs for the more advanced systems. If you're firing hundreds of interceptors in sustained engagements, you are burning through stockpiles at a rate that even the most robust military-industrial supply chain struggles to replenish in real time.
And here's the piece that connects the UAE and Israel stories. The entire Middle Eastern security architecture right now depends on the assumption that missile defense works reliably and indefinitely. Both the UAE and Israel are betting their national security on the ability to intercept every incoming threat. But the adversaries, whether Houthi forces, Iranian proxies, or state actors, have figured out that volume overwhelms defense. Launch enough cheap projectiles simultaneously and some will get through. The doctrine of defense dominance is being stress-tested in real time, and the results should concern everyone.
And who benefits from this perpetual cycle? Defense contractors. Raytheon, now RTX Corporation, produces the Patriot system components used by the UAE. Rafael Advanced Defense Systems and Israel Aerospace Industries produce Iron Dome and David Sling interceptors. Every interception is a sale. Every attack that prompts a new defense order is revenue. I'm not saying these companies are manufacturing conflict, but I am saying their financial incentives are perfectly aligned with a region that never stops shooting. Investors should be asking hard questions about that alignment.
Let's pivot to China, because this next story is genuinely alarming and is getting almost no attention in Western media. The South China Morning Post reports that top nuclear weapons, radar, and missile experts have vanished from the Chinese Academy of Engineering website. Zhao Xiangying, a 72-year-old nuclear weapons scientist and CAE member, had his profile scrubbed entirely. And he's not alone. Similar removals have been noted for other academicians specializing in defense-related fields. Chinese media flagged the changes on Saturday, but no official explanation has been provided.
Let's be clear about what the Chinese Academy of Engineering is. This is not some minor academic institution. The CAE is the highest academic body for engineering science and technology in China. Membership is the pinnacle of a scientific career. You don't just quietly remove profiles of members from this organization without a reason. The question is whether this represents a purge, a security classification upgrade, or something else entirely. And the fact that multiple defense-related scientists are affected simultaneously suggests this is a coordinated decision, not an administrative glitch.
There are several possible explanations, none of them comforting. The first is that these scientists are being moved into classified programs so sensitive that even their public academic affiliations are being erased. If China is accelerating weapons development to the point where it needs to completely scrub the public identities of its top researchers, that tells you something about the pace and urgency of their military modernization. This would be consistent with satellite imagery showing rapid expansion of China's nuclear missile silo fields in western provinces.
The second possibility is a political purge. Under Xi Jinping, China's military and defense establishment has undergone repeated anti-corruption campaigns that have swept up generals, defense industry executives, and now potentially the scientific elite. If these scientists ran afoul of the party, whether through actual corruption, political disloyalty, or simply being associated with the wrong faction, their disappearance from public records could signal detention or worse. China's system does not distinguish between professional accountability and political obedience.
And here's the third possibility that nobody wants to discuss. Defection or intelligence compromise. If any of these scientists had been in contact with foreign intelligence services, or if China suspected they had, the immediate response would be exactly what we're seeing: scrub their public profiles, restrict information about their work, and control the narrative. The timing is notable. This comes during a period of heightened tensions with the United States and its allies over Taiwan, technology export controls, and military posturing in the South China Sea.
What's particularly striking is that the South China Morning Post, which operates under the editorial environment of Hong Kong, is one of the outlets reporting this. Chinese state media has been largely silent, which in itself is informative. When Beijing wants to publicize an anti-corruption action, it does so loudly and with great fanfare as a deterrent. The silence here suggests this is not something the party wants to draw attention to. That alone should make every intelligence analyst in Washington, London, and Tokyo sit up and pay attention to what exactly is happening inside China's defense science establishment.
Now let's connect this to the broader pattern. China is scrubbing its weapons scientists from public view. The Middle East is in an active missile war where interception capabilities are being tested to their limits. The UAE is shooting down ballistic missiles over its cities. Israel is denying it's running out of interceptors. Do you see the thread? The global arms race is accelerating on multiple fronts simultaneously, and the public is being given a sanitized, fragmented version of events that prevents them from seeing the full picture of how rapidly the security environment is deteriorating.
And that brings us to Iran, where dozens of people have been arrested for allegedly sharing sensitive information with Israel. This was reported by Iran's Tasnim news agency and covered by Middle East Eye. Let's unpack this. Mass arrests for espionage in the middle of an active military confrontation between Iran and Israel tell you that Tehran believes it has a serious internal security problem. These aren't isolated cases. Dozens of people rounded up simultaneously suggests either a large network was uncovered or the regime is casting a wide net out of paranoia.
Both possibilities are significant. If Iran has genuinely uncovered a significant Israeli intelligence network operating inside the country, that represents a major intelligence achievement by Israel's Mossad and a major security failure by Iran's counterintelligence services. It would mean that during a period when Iran has been launching missiles and drones at Israel and its allies, Israel had eyes and ears inside Iran feeding back targeting information, military movements, and strategic intelligence. That's an extraordinary vulnerability for Iran to admit publicly.
But consider the alternative reading. Authoritarian regimes under military pressure frequently manufacture espionage cases to explain away their own failures and to suppress internal dissent. If Iranian missile attacks have been less effective than planned, or if Iranian military positions have been struck with suspicious precision, the regime needs an explanation that doesn't involve admitting its own military inadequacy. Blaming spies is the oldest play in the authoritarian handbook. It redirects public anger from the government's failures to alleged internal enemies.
And think about the human cost of these arrests. Dozens of people, with families, careers, and lives, are now in Iranian custody accused of the most serious crime a state can levy against its citizens in wartime: treason. Iran's judicial process for espionage cases offers virtually no transparency, no independent legal representation, and no meaningful appeal. Some of these people may genuinely have been passing information to Israel. Others may be political dissidents, ethnic minorities, or simply people who said the wrong thing online. We may never know, because Iran's courts operate behind closed walls.
Let's zoom out and look at what all 5 of these stories tell us when you read them together. In Kenya, poor people are dying because wealthy nations won't pay for the climate damage they caused and because local elites have stolen the infrastructure budgets. In the Gulf, nations are spending billions on missile defense while the underlying conflicts that generate the attacks remain completely unaddressed. In China, the state is hiding its weapons scientists, suggesting either an acceleration of military programs or internal instability within the defense establishment. And in Iran, citizens are being swept up in mass arrests that serve the regime's narrative needs.
The common thread is that in every one of these stories, ordinary people bear the cost while power structures remain intact and unaccountable. Kenyan flood victims didn't cause climate change. Emirati civilians didn't choose to intervene in Yemen. Chinese scientists didn't set the political winds that may be destroying their careers. Iranian citizens accused of espionage may be nothing more than convenient scapegoats. The powerful make decisions, and the powerless absorb the consequences. That is the story of our time, and it is the story that mainstream media consistently fails to frame honestly.
And look at how the media itself functions in this ecosystem. The South China Morning Post covers Kenya and China's missing scientists with depth that Western outlets largely ignore. Middle East Eye covers the Gulf and Iranian stories that American cable news reduces to 30-second segments between commercial breaks. The information is available, but it's scattered across regional outlets while the dominant global media platforms focus on narratives that serve their own national interests. If you're only reading American or British news, you are getting an American or British version of reality, not reality itself.
Let's talk about the defense industry angle because it ties several of these stories together directly. The missile exchanges between Iran, its proxies, Israel, and the Gulf states are generating enormous demand for defense systems. Patriot batteries, Iron Dome replenishments, advanced radar systems, counter-drone technology. Every escalation creates a procurement cycle. Every procurement cycle enriches the same contractors. And those contractors lobby the same governments that make the foreign policy decisions that perpetuate the conflicts. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's a publicly documented feedback loop that operates in plain sight.
Consider this. The United States has approved billions in emergency military aid that includes interceptor replenishment for allies in the Middle East. That money flows from American taxpayers through the Pentagon to defense contractors, who then deliver weapons systems to foreign governments engaged in conflicts that American foreign policy helped create or sustain. Meanwhile, 62 people are dead in Kenya from flooding, and the climate adaptation funding promised by those same wealthy nations remains largely undelivered. The priorities are not hidden. They're just not discussed honestly.
And the China story adds another dimension entirely. If Beijing is indeed accelerating its nuclear and missile programs to the point where it needs to classify the identities of its own scientists, we are looking at a potential arms race that dwarfs anything we've seen since the Cold War. The United States is already modernizing its nuclear triad at an estimated cost of $1.7 trillion over 30 years. China is expanding. Russia has been brandishing nuclear threats since its invasion of Ukraine. We are in a new nuclear arms race, and the public conversation about it is virtually non-existent.
Nobody is connecting these dots for the public. You have to read a Hong Kong newspaper to learn that Chinese weapons scientists are being scrubbed from the internet. You have to read a Middle Eastern outlet to get honest reporting on interceptor shortages and mass espionage arrests in Iran. You have to dig past page 12 to find out that 62 Kenyans are dead from floods that should have been survivable with proper infrastructure. The fragmentation of this information is not accidental. It serves the interests of every government involved to keep their citizens focused on domestic trivia rather than the global security crisis unfolding around them.
And here's what I want our viewers to understand about the Iran espionage arrests specifically. When a state begins mass arresting citizens for alleged collaboration with a foreign adversary, it is a sign of a regime under stress. It doesn't matter whether the espionage is real or fabricated. The act of publicizing mass arrests is designed to create a climate of fear and suspicion within the population. It tells every Iranian citizen that they are being watched, that their communications are monitored, and that deviation from regime loyalty will be met with the harshest possible consequences. That is the behavior of a government that feels threatened from within.
And who suffers? Dual nationals. Academics with international contacts. Journalists who communicate with foreign colleagues. Business people with overseas relationships. Anyone with a digital footprint that crosses borders becomes a potential target in this kind of dragnet. Iran has a documented history of using espionage charges against people whose real offense was advocating for reform or maintaining foreign relationships that the regime finds politically inconvenient. The label of spy is one of the most dangerous weapons an authoritarian government possesses, precisely because it is so difficult to disprove.
Let me bring it back to the big picture, because our viewers deserve to understand the world they're actually living in, not the one the nightly news pretends exists. We are in a moment where climate disasters are killing the poorest people on Earth while the richest argue about carbon credit trading schemes. We are in a moment where nations are shooting ballistic missiles at each other's cities while diplomats issue bland statements about de-escalation. We are in a moment where nuclear powers are hiding their scientists and expanding their arsenals while arms control frameworks collapse. This is not stable. This is not sustainable.
And the Kenya story is the one that should haunt us most, because it reveals the ultimate truth about global priorities. 62 people dead, 8 of them children, from flooding in a capital city. The infrastructure to prevent those deaths exists. The engineering knowledge is available. The money is there, it's just being spent on interceptor missiles and nuclear warheads instead of drainage systems and flood barriers. Every society reveals its values through its budget, and the global budget tells you that the powerful would rather perfect the art of killing than invest in keeping the vulnerable alive.
So what do we do with all of this? First, diversify your news sources. If you're watching one country's media, you're getting one country's propaganda. Read the South China Morning Post. Read Middle East Eye. Read Al Jazeera, Deutsche Welle, and local African press. Cross-reference everything. The truth is not owned by any single outlet. Second, follow the money. When you see a military story, ask who manufactured the weapons. When you see a disaster story, ask who defunded the infrastructure. When you see an espionage story, ask who benefits from the fear. The answers are always there if you're willing to look.
Third, demand accountability from your own government, whatever country you're in. If your tax dollars are funding interceptor missiles for foreign wars while people die in preventable floods, that is a choice your government made with your money. If your government is silent on Chinese military escalation while doing business with Beijing, that is a choice. If your government sells weapons to Gulf states that are simultaneously targets and participants in regional conflict, that is a choice. None of this is inevitable. All of it is the result of decisions made by people who can be held accountable if enough citizens demand it.
And finally, reject the fragmentation. These stories are not separate events happening in separate corners of the world. They are all manifestations of the same global system, a system that prioritizes military power over human welfare, that protects the wealthy while abandoning the poor, that classifies information to prevent public scrutiny, and that arrests citizens who dare to challenge state narratives. Until we see these connections clearly, we will continue to be managed rather than informed. Truth Report exists because we refuse to accept that. And you should refuse to accept it too.
That's our show. 62 dead in Kenya. Missiles over the UAE. Scientists vanishing in China. Interceptor denials in Israel. Mass arrests in Iran. 5 stories, 1 world, 0 accountability from the people in charge. I'm Alex Truth. Read widely, think critically, and never let anyone tell you that asking questions makes you the problem. The people who don't want you asking questions are the problem. We'll see you next time on Truth Report. Stay sharp out there.